This is my channel's weekly compendium, ending Monday, August 14th, 2023. Case file number 1238, written by Zesting Lemon. The booming close encounter of the first kind. There are a few things that my family has seen over the years, so I'll list them, although none are by me since I've never had an unexplainable moment. My mom and dad were sitting in the living room of the house when a strange red light, like a laser, came through the wall and then went through another wall to the room next to the living room where it stopped at the wall facing the back of the house. It didn't last long and maybe it was just some weird laser, but I ain't ever seen a laser go through multiple thick walls. My dad and his brother were in their garden chopping wood when my dad saw a metallic object floating stationary in the sky. He looked around to his brother and asked if he saw it too. He nodded, and they both looked back at the object before it disappeared seconds later. Apparently, it couldn't have been a satellite or the ISS because it looked like it was so close, like the height of a low-flying aircraft, 10 minutes after it had taken off. My grandfather, on my dad's side of the family, was coming home from work. He worked at the fire station a fair while away from where he lived, and, for a fair amount of his journey, he was traveling on a small little country road out in the sticks. At one point in his journey, one evening, he could see an illuminated object flying low in the sky, and after a short while, he noticed it seemed to be following him. He carried on driving, and as far as he was aware, it still seemed to be following him. Eventually, he got home and spent the rest of the evening with the family, but when he went to bed, apparently he looked out of the window. He could still see the UFO hovering just outside the house. This is where it gets weird. A long time ago, my dad had a friend who he doesn't really speak to now, but after a while of knowing him, he got to know his dad as well. They all got on well and often shared a few pints at the pub. One day, Dad's friend went on holiday, I think to Majorca or one of the Spanish islands, but don't quote me on that, with his dad, and they went swimming in the ocean. His dad, God bless his soul, unfortunately drowned. Fast forward a few years and my dad was visiting his friend when his friend decided to go and get takeaway. When his friend was gone, Dad started to hear a loud booming sound and he realized it was coming from the steps as if someone was going downstairs and then it carried on down the hallway up to the room he was in and then through the room. I think it was through the room at least, I'm not so sure. My dad was seriously confused and understandably scared about what had just happened. A few minutes later, his friend walked through the door with the takeaway, saw Dad's face and laughed saying, "You've heard it too." Fast forward a few more years and Dad was at the pub with his friends again, talking about the incident. He then opened the case for his glasses, and it was full of water? This was weird since he kept it in his pocket far away from water. He then for some reason decided to taste a bit of the water at the end of his finger. It was salt water. A bit ironic considering his friend's father, God bless his soul, had drowned at sea. Apparently, he has repeatedly found salt water in places after thinking or talking about the incident. The water manifests. Bonus file written by J.N. Hummel. Parrot communicating from the beyond? My granddad died when I was 6. My nan took it pretty hard at first, but after a few weeks, she became a lot more cheerful. My dad talked to her and asked her how she was doing, and she said she was a lot better. Now that Granddad is back? When he asked her what she meant, she said she meant exactly what she said. Granddad had been gone, but now he was back. He would come and sit in his favorite chair and she'd put on the TV for him and the parrot would talk to him. My granddad had bought a green parrot on a whim from a pet store a few years before. Not long after this started, some of the family had gone around to my nan's for Sunday lunch. My mom and my aunt helped her with the cooking and we'd all just sit down at the table getting ready to eat when there was a sound of a door opening and closing upstairs, and then footsteps. They went down the hallway and then we heard another door creak open and close. Everyone just looked at each other. There was nobody else in the house other than the people sitting around the table. And then my nan just cheerfully announces, and I remember she looked right at me and my sister as she said it. "That will be your granddad." And right as she did, the parrot starts screaming, "Bob, Bob," my granddad's name. My dad sprang up from the table and ran upstairs to check things out. A minute or two later, he came back down and just shook his head and looked at everyone and said, "Nothing there." but I thought he looked very pale when he came back in. He sat back down and didn't say another word, and we all just finished our lunch in silence. Within a matter of months, Nan was back to normal. No more talk about Granddad coming to visit, and now she was referring to him in the past tense. She had accepted his death. There was another weird part to the story. However, this is just something my dad told us, and it's entirely possible he was making it all up, but all included anyway. Not long after the footsteps at lunch incident, Nan was having a bad day and my dad didn't want to leave her alone, so he stayed at her house that night. Now, according to my dad, Granddad had an OCD trait whereby he couldn't stand to see a pile of coins unsorted. If anyone just threw a handful of coins onto a table, Granddad couldn't rest until he had neatly sorted them into similar piles. As my dad was getting ready for bed that night in the spare room, he threw the coins in his pocket onto the dresser. The next morning, when he woke up, the coins had been sorted and stacked into neat piles. Case file number 1239, written by Abrujis. A strange afternoon I can't remember. One day I got home after college and felt very tired, so I went to sleep somewhere between 2 and 3 p.m. I woke up at 8 p.m. because my parents woke me up so we could go have dinner. When driving to the restaurant, I told them I was very tired and I slept all afternoon. They all laughed and told me I was working all afternoon, on my computer, in the living room, and then I went to sleep for a few minutes before they woke me up. I have no memory of it. I didn't know what happened that afternoon. The browser history confirmed what they said. Apparently, I slept, but I also worked. Case file number 1240, written by Taters.2. My worthless precognition. I have worthless precognition. All my life I've had moments when a certain vision will get stuck in my head. The first time happened when I was in high school. For a week I had a vision of me handing something to someone sitting on a box. I had that vision every day, randomly. It would just pop in my head. Fast forward to Saturday night. I got invited to sing with a friend's band. We were both terrible, but it was fun. He told me to bring any music I'd like to try. I had a cassette tape in my back pocket. So we're in his basement setting up. I'm plugging in my mic. The drummer behind me says, "Did anyone bring anything to play?" I took the cassette out of my back pocket and turned around and handed it to the drummer, who was sitting on a huge amp. Me handing something to a person sitting on a box. It was like the world stopped for a second. Then it went on, and I never had that vision again. I've had visions like this my whole life, but they're always unimportant, non-world-shaking little moments or actions that have literally nothing to do with anything. Once, I had a vision of opening a door and seeing someone I knew. It was a weird vision, where we each stop, frozen, like we're unsure what to do. Days of this, that's all. Then one day I went to the doctor, and when I opened the door, my uncle was coming out. We froze and stared at each other. The world stopped for a moment. Then we grinned and I stepped aside. He went on his way. I went in. Never had that vision again. It would be neat, except we saw each other on an almost daily basis for years. Like I said, worthless precognition. Neat, but not terribly useful. Case file number 1241, written by Tired Pandastic. How my dead uncle saved me from a Greek wildfire. In 2009, Greece experienced some really bad wildfires. 2018 would knock them out of the park, but I digress. I happened to be home alone as my parents were on a trip to see family and I was working. I sleep in during the summer. I was woken up quite early by my phone going off. It was my dad in a panicky state. My old man is retired Air Force. He doesn't panic. He told me our area was burning and I needed to grab some important documents and book it from the house. I scrambled. He had to hang up because he and Mom were cutting the trip short and racing home. I pulled together whatever of the docs I could find and my laptop, checking outside every now and then to see where the fire was. I could see the front approaching the neighborhood. I couldn't find our passports. I started panicking. Out of nowhere, I heard my uncle, my dad's brother, and the most chill man in the world say, "Upper shelf, on the right, under the book." And yep, that's where they were. I grabbed them and fled, again my uncle saying, "Better go to the square with the spring." which was like 5 minutes from my house, but brought me out of the direction of the smoke and where our family friends found me and kept me company till my parents made it home. We were very lucky. The wind changed at the last minute and our house was spared. Only one house burned in our neighborhood and nobody was hurt. My uncle died in 2002, leukemia. I was pretty close to him and my dad felt his loss very much. His funeral was the first time I saw my pops cry. I haven't told him what I heard that day. I don't want to disturb his peace of mind. Creepy file number 108, written by Anonymous. How a complete stranger got my prescription. I went to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription and they told me it had already been picked up. In order to pick up your prescription at this pharmacy, you had to state your name and date of birth, and you had to sign your name on a sheet of paper, and they would put a sticker identifying the prescription next to your signature. Given all that, I don't see how someone else had been able to pick up my prescription, but someone did. They had a security camera aimed at the people who walked up to the pharmacy counter. They showed me the image of the guy who picked up my prescription, and the guy was a complete stranger. I'm assuming that the pharmacy technician who gave it to him was being sloppy and didn't follow all the protocols, but the person would have to give a name in order to pick up a prescription because they're sorted alphabetically by last name. So some guy who coincidentally had a first and last name that sounded like mine also coincidentally had a prescription to pick up on the same day as me? And he happens to get a lazy or distracted pharmacy technician who didn't ask his birthday, even though every damn time I went in there, they asked for mine? Very odd. Case file number 1242, written by Falklian. The Nuclear Aliens. Sometime in my mid-20s, around 2006-2007 maybe, my girlfriend, now wife, and I lived in a fairly crappy apartment complex. We were used to neighbors fighting, cops getting called, etc. Anyway, where we lived, our bedroom window faced east, so it was pretty typical that our room was flooded in sunlight fairly early in the morning. It also faced the parking lot, so we occasionally had to deal with the headlamps from people parking also lighting up our room. One summer morning, we both woke up to our room flooded in light. We're talking sun up over the horizon, no shadows in the room bright. Usually an indicator of us sleeping in. However, we both looked at each other and realized something was wrong. It was also intensely hot in our room. Looking at the clock, it was somewhere around 2 to 3 a.m. I immediately thought, we've been nuked. Hopped over the bed and grabbed my girlfriend to run to a safer area. As soon as we hit the hallway, the light went away. It didn't fade away or sweep across the room as if a car was parking or going by. It just went dark like a switch was flipped. I ran back into the room to look outside and saw nothing. Just a calm early morning. No cars, no sounds really. And maybe that's another indicator of something weird happening. We chalked it up to a car, possibly a cop, shining their searchlight around in the parking lot, which isn't an uncommon occurrence. We went back to bed and woke up to our alarm to a perfectly normal summer morning. Over the years, we've talked about that night every so often. We live near a military base as well as a nuclear power plant, so an accident at either is plausible. The main thing that makes us uneasy is the light and the intense heat. We both experienced it, and there's no way it was a car headlamp or even floodlights. The color was like sunlight, which is why we thought we slept in. Our room was flooded in light, no shadows anywhere. A typical car going by or parking let off less light, cooler in color, and not intense enough to warm anything. I'm a fairly analytical person. I don't tend to believe in things like ghosts, aliens, etc. But after that night, I'm leaning in two directions. We got abducted by aliens, or we witnessed a disaster and quantum suicide or immortality is why we're still here. Or it was some dumbass with a really bright light messing with us. Bonus file written by Kelasin Zyphris. The Unexplainable Growl at my aunt's house. I have an aunt whose house is supposedly haunted. Used to be a funeral home before another family turned it into an actual house, farming a surrounding cornfield. An elderly lady died tripping down the stairs. Members of my family have seen weird stuff there before, with the stairs and upstairs living room being hotspots. My aunts used to use it. My mother got really freaked out when she saw what she thought was my cousin go running up the stairs, yelled at her to not run up the stairs, and then my cousin popped out of the downstairs living room asking what's wrong. Now, personal anecdotes like this are highly fallible and subject to misperception. I don't expect anyone to believe me about the things I saw, but I saw an orb once, too big to just be dust, and it didn't follow my eyes like glare would. But there's a natural explanation of a big bug reflecting lamplight, and I just lost track of it. Could have been. Nah. The more interesting event was when my cousin was feeling particularly weirded out by her room, which is directly beneath the upstairs living room with all the activity, including that orb. I'm interested in these things from a scientific perspective, so I offered to sit in there with her and see if we can get something to happen. We go in, I ask anything there to do something. Nothing happens. I sat on the bed with my back to the wall, talking with my cousin for a bit. And then there's 2 knocks on the wall behind me. I even feel the vibration. We both hop up and check the adjacent room to see if someone else in the family was messing with us. Nothing. They're all on the other side of the house. Pipes, maybe. Cousin thinks I knocked on the wall, but I didn't. So we go back and see if we can get anything else. Nothing. Eventually, my aunt walks in to check on us. And right as she walks in, a distinct canine growl rings out from the center of the room. Both their eyes go wide. I'm processing what I just heard and ask if they both heard that. Yeah, the last family had a dog. So I don't know what that was. The obvious explanation of ghosts is there, but science is about gathering verifiable, repeatable evidence. Explanatory theories are only useful if they have predictive power. If explanation, then X will happen under Y conditions, and almost all attempts to prompt ghost activity either fail or have an existing explanation that the event can't be unraveled from, like the bug or pipe thing. But that growl was weird. 3 of us in different spots heard it from the center of the room. I can't think of an explanation other than a sound of a dog growl spontaneously generated from the center of the room, or we had a simultaneous auditory hallucination. The most likely explanation from my perspective is I don't have a good natural explanation for what the 3 of us heard that day. Case file number 1243, written by Anonymous. A time warp adventure in the woods. So, I'm 14 at the time, maybe 15, and my friend is over. We're jamming, playing music, eating some mac and cheese, drink some coffee, decide to walk up to the park. At the time, I'm living on the outskirts of a county, mostly woods, but there's this park that leads to a series of creeks and streams gifted by natural spring, Econfina. It's about noon at this point, 11:44 to be exact. The repeating numbers stick in my head to this day. The park is about 4 miles up the road, and we head out. Get there and decide to explore the woods for no good reason. We start walking through the paths, or following creeks, generally having a really fun time. We come across this single family home in the middle of the woods in pristine condition, but with no inn or outlets. Just this bizarre, seemingly inaccessible house in the middle of nowhere. We laugh about it and move on. It's been a few hours. We're hot, itchy, ready to head home, so we backtrack. It doesn't take long to realize we have 100% no clue where we are or how to get back. We panic. Start to kind of run a while, then stop and think a while. Try to listen for the highway. Try to figure out cardinal directions, etc. Finally, in a state of panic, we decide you can't see as many trees in one particular direction, so we just walk as straight as possible toward it. We do, finally, emerge out onto a road. We suss out which way to go back. We were a long way from the park. Finally made it to our road, and then back past the park and all the way home. I'm expecting to walk in to find my mother, long home from work, panicked about where we were. This predates cell phones. But no, empty house. Go inside to see how long we were lost, and the clock reads 11:52. It's been 8 minutes. I still talk to this friend often. This is nearly 30 years later. And every once in a while, one of us will bring up the time we got lost and stumble through the time continuum. Bonus file written by Chinese Chai Tea. the red Sharpie and bald man. My ex and I were sleeping in bed. We had a twin mattress against the wall. It was a hot night, and he always slept shirtless. When he woke up the next morning, he was scribbled on by what looks like a red Sharpie marker. I went to bed after him, and he certainly didn't have scribbles from his neck down his back, and his forehead too. Here's the kicker, neither of us owned a red Sharpie marker. We also just moved, and anything like that would still have been packed away even if it existed. I was up putting a roast on at night. I was pan-searing it before I stuck it in the slow cooker. I was wide awake and not even sleepy. I hear creaking and yell at the kids to get back in bed. I see something out of the corner of my eye and turn. I lock eyes with what appears to be a man's pale white, bald head, probably 3 feet to 4 feet off the ground, no body. He's looking at me, very pathetic looking, almost like a pleading face like he's begging. His head is standing out against the wall. Thinking this thing will go away, I blink. It is still there. I had to turn away from it physically and run out the back door. I called my husband at the time to let me back in the house, and then the bald man was nowhere to be found. Bonus file written by Chinese Chai Tea, Demonic Voice from a Broken Doll. In 1995, my dad, brother-in-law, and baby nephew sat on the couch in the living room, coming in from a cookout because of a bad storm outside. I had this old My Pal 2 doll with a broken back, no batteries. It was thrown in an old toy bin for my nephew to play with. My nephew pulls it out and starts tapping buttons. It obviously doesn't work. Then the toy turns its head 360 degrees, looks at my dad and says, "God," in a drawn-out, demonic-sounding voice, then turns its head back and stops working. My dad was an atheist, and his eyes lit up in total shock. My brother-in-law and I couldn't believe it. My dad took it out of my nephew's hand and sat it outside, and eventually threw it away. Another time, a cousin and I were in the basement. My mom needed to go to the store and told us she was leaving. We sat down there, and we heard her leave. About 5 minutes later, we heard her come in the door and say, "I need help, come get some bags." We heard rustling like she was dropping them in the doorway, movement of feet and shuffling sounds. We both thought that was pretty fast. She had to take longer than that to get to the store. So we ran up and found the door locked and her car not in the driveway. She wasn't home, and we were scared crapless. We sat on the porch and waited for her to come back almost a half hour later. Her exact words as she got out of the car was, "I need help, come get some bags." She wasn't in the house. She never came back. The last one, when my son was about 2, I was living in this crappy apartment. He was extremely sick and threw up everywhere in his bed. I didn't have any quarters for the laundry machine. Every time I gave him clean covers, he'd just throw up again and again. I couldn't leave him. My husband wasn't home and I had no way to wash his bedclothes. So he starts babbling. He could speak very young. I think that being sick, he keeps talking about a man and a lady. The man had a green shirt and the woman had a hat on her head. He would say hi, point and wave. I didn't think anything of it. So a few minutes later, I'm washing some stuff and find a stack of quarters on the windowsill that I knew were not there before. I turned around and found another stack on the entertainment center. In the end, I had enough money to wash all of his bedclothes. Thinking back, the man and woman he described sounded like my grandfather, who always wore a green mechanic shirt, and my aunt, who died of cancer, who always wore a turban on her head before she passed. They both died the same year, right before he was born. Case file number 1244, written by Bardo5. A James Dean song, Foretold of Tragedy. I love to ride motorcycles, but never ever forget how dangerous they can be. I'm a grown man with a wife and kids, so if something bad happens, I'm hurting a lot of people. So on a ride one day, I'm sitting at an overlook, agonizing over whether I really should keep riding or not. I've got my iPod on shuffle and think, okay, I'm going to take whatever song comes up next as a sign of what I should do. Next song comes up and it's James Dean by the Eagles, a song about James Dean's death in a car accident. Along came a spider, picked up a rider, and took him down the road to eternity. So there's nothing subtle there, nothing ambiguous. As I'm riding home, thinking about selling the bike, I turn a corner and I kind of laugh thinking about how stupid it would be to bump the bike because of a tiny little dog in the road. Then I turn the next corner and there's this huge freaking Rottweiler standing in the middle of the road just staring at me. I mean, this thing was right out of The Omen. So my mind's made up. I sell the bike. 2 weeks later, the guy I sold it to wrecked the bike because a dog ran right in front of him. He wasn't killed or even hurt badly, but it feels like we're way beyond coincidence here. Still miss writing, but feel very confident I did the right thing. Case file number 1245, written by Zeralton Grex. My mom's psychic warning before a car accident. My older sister, Kate, was getting ready to go to her boyfriend's house. She was taking the family car, and the boyfriend was going to follow her in his car. They were both already at my family's home. My sister came into my room where my mom and I were talking to say bye to us. As the hug between her and my mom is ending, my mom got this weird blank look on her face and touched Kate's chest right about where one boob starts. My sister is obviously weirded out and says something to the effect of, "What the hell, Mom? Why did you touch my boob?" To which my mom replies, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just thought," and trailed off, still with a blank, distant expression on her face. Kate and I make eye contact, probably both thinking, Mom's a little loony, before she awkwardly says her goodbyes to my mom. Mom is still staring, expression reading very concerned and confused. She just says, "Kate, honey, be safe." Then Kate says okay and leaves. I ask my mom what the hell just happened, and she can't seem to find any words. Not 2 minutes later, her phone goes off. It's the boyfriend. Kate was hit head-on by someone driving in the wrong side of the street, going way too fast. Fortunately, she came away with only minor bumps and scrapes and a damaged knee, but the worst abrasion was from the seatbelt, right in the exact spot where my mom had touched her before she left. It's still a big, noticeable scar 12 years later. Cops said if she hadn't been wearing her seatbelt, she would have been thrown from the vehicle and could easily have died. My mom still can't find the words to describe what she felt or thought and is reluctant to talk about that night at all. Creepy file number 109, written by The Wild Boar, Codes and Secrets of the Denver Airport. Back in the late 80s, during the summer, my family was flying from Denver to our house a couple states over. This was in the old Denver airport, not the one we all think of now. We're sitting at the gate waiting to board when on the intercom we hear a woman say, "Paging Mr. Bunny, Mr. Easter Bunny, please pick up a white courtesy phone. Mr. Bunny, Mr. Easter Bunny." This was before the internet and during a time so far away from Easter. Was that a code or something? What would it even be code for? Usually codes are supposed to be nondescribed and only obvious to the people that know the code. Mr. Bunny, Mr. Easter Bunny is pretty freaking attention-getting. Maybe it was a joke, but the woman over the intercom had been asking for all kinds of other normal-sounding people as well. Bonus file written by Dry Cracker, The Ghostly Game of Dodgeball. I was a teenager in the Boy Scouts. Every week after the meetings, we would play some games while we waited for our parents to pick us up. Tag, basketball, etc. Our meetings were in a big old church, East Coast. I'm thinking built in the 1800s. The place definitely had a vibe, especially at night when we would meet. You could wander off from a meeting and there was just something unsettling being in an empty church kitchen or dark congregation hall. And I knew the building quite well, having volunteered for various improvement projects over the years as a scout. In fact, that reminds me of a painting downstairs one time, and behind a panel, you could see all the way across the church underground, between the earth and the first floor, just very off-putting. Anyway, back to the meeting. My friend and I went to the basement to find a ball to start a game with. We were chatting about where we could locate a ball down there when all of a sudden, we heard the sound of bouncing. I turn around the corner and in an empty hallway, just plain walls on either side, is a ball, the inflatable type you could grip and use for, say, dodgeball, bouncing as if someone had just dropped it. Dub, 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 dub. It came to rest and my friend and I just stared at it in terror. I'm not sure how much time passed before someone called for us, came noisily down the stairs and retrieved us and the ball. To this day, I can't explain how that happened, but it still gives me the chills to think about it, and it's just a ball. But where did it come from? Case notes file 1238. The booming close encounter of the first kind. The booming sound in the salt water in the glasses suggests a direct link between your dad and this alien activity. It's common for people to be abducted multiple times, for aliens to focus on a few specific people more than others. I do wonder why. Is it some genetic variation that makes these aliens particularly interested in particular people? There are theories involving the mating between species, creating hybrids that could function in both environments. If the aliens in question are not capable of surviving in our oxygen and nitrogen environment and water-based environment, maybe they're trying to create a bridge between them. For some reason, this creeps me out even more than them wanting to just invade and exterminate us. It's more intimate malevolence. Case notes for the bonus file. Parrot communicating from the beyond? I too cannot abide unsorted coins. Must be neatly stacked. There's a device where you can just put in coins at the top and it, by the weight and shape of the coin, automatically stacks them where they belong. That's pretty cool. And animals do have extra senses, beyond our own. Beyond most humans. Parrots though, was this a case of your granddad's last remaining soul fragment paying visit to your grandma, and then not wanting to drain energy from anyone, his soul finally dissipated out into the ether after a few months? The batteries were dead, basically. I think that's probably what happened. The parrot merely being, well, the alert of the incident, and definitely helpful for your grandma. And now time for the quote of the day. I believe in getting into hot water. It keeps you clean. J.K. Chesterton. And I think there's more to this quote in the literal sense. Yes, obviously hot water is good to help clean the body. Take a bath or go in a hot tub and all that, it's great. But there's also the idea that in life, if you always play it safe, well, you're probably not going to get very far. You need to take gambles and risks and get into hot water potentially. Maybe it won't turn out well, maybe you'll get burned, but maybe you'll emerge with some burns and new life experiences that make you even stronger. You know, it's also the adage of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, not always, but often it is true. Take some chances in life. You'll never know where you end up. I certainly took a gamble on this channel, and it paid off. It's always a risk when you try something new, and maybe it won't work out, but just try something new after that. Maybe you'll keep getting burned, but you can survive it, and eventually, you get a nice prize. Case notes file 1239. A strange afternoon I can't remember. So autopilot is a real thing, where we aren't consciously aware of our actions, but as we've done so many times a single action, a single event, we run through it without realizing it. In this case, just using the internet, studying, I guess. So it's more like advanced sleepwalking. Maybe directed by some other entity as a kind of puppet master. I sometimes wonder if sleepwalking involves another force controlling us, almost like us taking over a Sims character in a video game, just directing them and then they can be left on their own, but they don't realize sometimes we take them over. Sometimes the soul takes over. Case notes file 1240. My worthless precognition. Yes, neat, but not terribly useful. Like many genetic oddities some humans have, most can be fun gimmicks, but not exactly life or world-changing superpowers. But that's okay though. One thing this does grant you is a first-person perspective of true reality, the buffer behind the curtain. You can peek behind it. Just take a little glance. Randomly for unknown reasons, you don't control when or what you see, but you do see the film being played. You can't alter it because the film was already acted, edited, and published. But you can see it being played. You can see how the sausage is made, a little bit of it. Still, one day perhaps you'll get a glimpse of the next act, a very important one, and who knows, maybe it'll glimpse the very end of the tape, just before real choice re-enters into the picture. So don't discount this power. I think there'll be more to it eventually. Case notes for file 1241. How my dead uncle saved me from a Greek wildfire. So I know this was a long time ago, but I'm still sorry for your loss. I don't think telling your dad what you heard would disturb his peace, though. And to the contrary, I lost my granddad too. Not exactly the same, but still. On my mother's side a couple years ago, if I knew with an actual first-hand account of someone hearing his voice speak to them, let's say, It would help them find documents they had no idea where they were. Well, it wouldn't be closure, no, but rather the opposite. Proof that closure isn't even necessary. That's even better, in my opinion. Case notes for the creepy file number 108. How a complete stranger got my prescription. So most likely this was no accident. Sadly, over-the-counter medications do fetch a good price on the black market. Someone knew you well enough to know you took medicine and deliberately impersonated you. That's my guess. Apparently by your description you didn't need an actual ID, just a signature, which isn't too hard to forge. And I mean, honestly, do people even really pay attention to how identical each signature is? I mean, I know my signature is terrible, especially these days. Who even writes anymore? The last time I signed for anything was, well, I mean, just like digitally on a notepad, you know, when the delivery driver comes. You don't even use a real pen. At least then I didn't. I don't even know what my signature will look like now, so I don't know. It seems like it's not too difficult if you wanted to steal it. So that would be my guess, just someone stealing your medication. Still creepy though, because they would have to know your name and that you took medication. So it would be someone maybe you didn't know, but that someone who knew someone that knew you. Now time for the quote of the day. There's a fine line between genius and insanity. I have erased this line. Oscar Levin. So yes, that line is success or failure. You're insane if you try something crazy and it fails, and you're a genius if it succeeds, especially if you keep trying weird things and they keep succeeding, then you're probably a genius. You're odd, but you know, like Nikola Tesla. Didn't really have much of a social life, more of a recluse, but he was a genius. That's, I don't think anyone can argue against that, really. And honestly, sometimes there is a bit of insanity mixed into the batch. You know, even if you're a genius successful, maybe you are a bit crazy, maybe a bit autistic, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, as long as you're not harming people, cool. Maybe you're not going to be fun at dinner parties, but that's okay. Rather have people, you know, inventing crazy, world-changing technology. That's a bit more useful. Case notes for file 1242. The nuclear aliens. So very curious that your mind went to potentially nukes in this scenario. Heightened tensions in there somewhere, but I get it. You address the critical point, and one I haven't heard from other alien encounters. Heat. Normally it's bright light, and that's that. Either they get abducted at that point or not, or don't remember it. But heat is almost never mentioned. That switch being flipped may be the point in time where you returned, and where your memories were no longer tampered with. I always advise, with caution, hypnotherapy for people who've potentially encountered an alien. You may be able to glean suppressed information through that process. Or maybe it was a military test of some sort. There are weapons designed to make people feel extreme heat from a distance. Of course, doing so on random civilians would be extraordinarily illegal, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, does it? And now with the advent of documents being released and congressional testimony that aliens exist, it's funny because now that the government admits it, most people don't even care, or rather, I guess they don't believe it. I'm not entirely sure where I stand on that. I think it's an odd time to release it now. Why admit to it now, is the question. Case notes for the bonus file. The unexplainable growl at my aunt's house. As a fellow science enthusiast, I understand how this must feel. If anything truly weird happens to me, I want to replicate it. I've tried so many times with the tennis balls that vanished. There's two that vanished. One when I was tossing it with someone else, and one where it just bounced and I never found it again. But I mean, I've bounced tennis balls countless times, I've thrown them countless times, and 99.9999% of the time, they're always where they should be. It's just those two times where they weren't, and I can't replicate it. I can't determine what the cause is. Maybe it is just like instability in the universe and there's no particular cause you can predict. But yeah, it never happens as I try to control the variables or reproduce it. It doesn't mean it isn't happening, of course, but it's so frustrating to not be able to definitively prove it because I can't reproduce the outcome. If I could, then I could record it and there'd be actual video evidence. That'd be amazing. So in this case, in this story, I can sit here and infer from all the countless stories I've read, the patterns ingrained into my brain now, that this is almost certainly an echo of a past life, or a ghost as most will say. Yes, even from dogs, I think they have spirits as well. I'm not sure about insects, I don't know where the cutoff point is, but I think to a certain level even animals are sentient and they have souls. Maybe it has something to do with a certain amount of intelligence that is required to play host to a soul? I don't know. But it does make you imagine all the horrors that take place in a slaughterhouse then. I'm sure there's a lot of haunted slaughterhouses if that's the case. Wouldn't want to work there. And now time for the facts of the day. Human teeth are the only part of the body that can't heal themselves. I think part of our eye as well can't. Generally, our body is able to heal themselves, and different approaches we can take as well with stem cells to inject the body with cells that can enable the body to use them to reconstitute an area or an organ or a part of skin and stuff like that. Stem cells are like this base template that can be used to do anything, almost. Pretty amazing. But yeah, teeth, I think they have some ways to infuse the enamel if you go to the dentist. Like the stuff you buy from the store, the toothpaste, I don't know if it really does anything. Maybe a little bit. But yeah, there are ways to repair it externally, but not through the body itself for teeth. So brush your teeth, and if you don't like flossing like me, get a water flosser so you don't have to like drag a string through your teeth. My teeth are very close together, so I don't like doing that. It's very uncomfortable. But the water picket, that works fine. Just brush your teeth and water floss if you can. And the other fact that is a bit funny, Fruit Loops are the same flavor, no matter the color. And I swear that's not true, but it's true. Your mind infuses certain sensory inputs based on expectation, not always reality. Case notes file 1243, a time warp adventure in the woods. So yeah, exploring the woods for no good reason is the best possible reason. I would do that all the time as a kid. Less so now. It's kind of hard in these places where I've lived now. Every bit of wood is either a park, which is fine, but it's the same thing every time, or it's just private property everywhere. So there's not really a lot of places to just go wander in the woods. I have to go a bit more rural for that. Eventually. Anyways, isolation is the key. At the micro level of reality especially, but at the macro scale too, I think. The more alone we are, the less time is in accordance with everyone else's time. It's thought that only extreme relative speed creates this time distortion, and that's how it should be based on known physics, but there are too many accounts of people lost in the woods or lost in abandoned places or odd places or even in elevators. We're just isolated, and then time doesn't flow the same way as it should for everyone else. And in this case, you weren't entirely alone, but just with one other person. And then you come back and the time doesn't add up. 8 minutes to do all that is impossible. Even if you were Usain Bolt sprinting at top speed, you couldn't do that. And obviously daylight savings doesn't apply at noon or 11, so that doesn't fit either. I do wonder about that random house in the woods. Maybe just a large hunting cabin? I don't think it has anything to do with the time glitch, but it is odd how it was described. Case notes for the bonus file. The Red Sharpie and Bald Man. So I have no clue about the Bald Man other than a kind of spirit that was very manifested, but only in the face, not the body. If you think about it, there's nothing saying that if you're a spirit and you manifest in the mortal plane, you have to bring your whole body along. It's not like the brain itself is controlling anything at that point, it's just the spirit manifesting in a certain sense, maybe just based on what it's used to. I suppose it could also mesh with the Sharpie incident. I think spirits with effort and energy can conjure physical mass into the world, or maybe pull it from different locations. Maybe he brought it from somewhere else in order to send a message. I'm guessing none of what was written or scribbled was discernible though. Writing as a ghost is no easy feat if I had to guess. It's like trying to write with your left hand or your non-dominant hand. It would explain the pleading kind of face too. He wanted or needed something but couldn't get the message across. I don't think he was malicious. Case notes for the bonus file. The demonic voice from a broken doll. So yeah, objects can be possessed as well. That seems clear to me. It doesn't have to be a human or animal, or any physical matter will do. And they can be made to do all sorts of strange things. What I gravitate towards more is the experience of buffered reality. Your mom coming home, but not actually being home itself. Almost like a holographic projection onto your both and your cousin's subconscious. Funneled to the conscious state. You experienced what would happen but hadn't yet. It's so cool, but I can't describe why it happens, even if the event itself is rather normal now. The cause, I don't know. It seems to be our fate, doesn't it? We can read up on so many extraordinary events that happen to people, and there's so many that there's no way they're all fake. I think tons of them are real, or at least people believe they're real, and they perceive it to happen to them. Especially when there's multiple people involved, and it's very unlikely to be some, hallucination or something. But we can't describe why they happen to certain people at certain times. In some ways, it's like the Aztecs trying to manipulate the weather through rituals and sacrifices. We're not at the level of fully understanding this, not yet. All we can do is see that it happens. There's a quote from a great show, sci-fi show, The Expanse. Not a spoiler or anything, but it's a person that says, monkeys and microwaves. And the intent of that is, I don't remember the full quote, but basically the idea is, if you put a monkey in a room with a microwave, maybe they'll push a few buttons eventually and turn on the microwave. And maybe they burn themselves. But they won't know what the hell a microwave is, or understand how it works, or anything. They just know that they pushed a few buttons and it hurt them. But that doesn't mean that it's a weapon or it's meant to harm you. You just don't know what the hell's going on. You can't discern the full picture. It's a very interesting way to think about it. And now time for the quote of the day. Thanks to the interstate highway system, it is now possible to travel from coast to coast without seeing anything. Charles Kuralt. Yeah, the interstate highway system is a great achievement, but it's funny because it wasn't meant for everyone to use it. It was meant more for the military movement and also for delivering goods and stuff, which makes sense. But now everyone uses it, and yeah, it's efficient. But I think we're too focused on efficiency. And you see that in the design of our cities, where it's just endless oceans of parking lots, and there's no soul there. It's efficient, sure, but is that really what we want, just efficiency? To some extent, maybe for moving goods, I get it, but the next time you take a road trip, instead of taking the interstate, take the back roads, if at all possible. You'll see so much more of the world that you live in, and I think that's better. You'll still get to your destination. Maybe it'll take a bit longer, but that's okay. It'll be a better journey. Remember, the journey is just as important as the destination, sometimes more important. Case notes for file 1244. A James Dean song, Foretold of Tragedy. So I share a love of motorcycles, or e-bikes, or bikes of any kind. Cars never felt natural to me, and they're so lethal. Part of it, I think, is that you're positioned on one side instead of being centered, so it doesn't feel as normal. I'm sure eventually it becomes normal, but I'd rather just have a motorcycle. And the other thing is, with a car, one mistake and people can die. It's possible on a motorcycle too, for sure, but far less likely to kill someone else, versus a car. The risk is front-loaded on yourself, and I'm okay with that. I'd rather have the risk on me instead of on other people. Now that said, everyone should ride carefully and not engage in any speed demon activities, as tempting as they may be, and they are tempting. These stories do illustrate the dangers of biking, yes. Was it a real omen, though? Maybe a guardian angel interaction, effectively warning you away from a near-certain accident later on. I don't think it was like a cursed bike or anything, and even with great gear and not traveling too fast, it can be fatal. Or maybe worse, injuries that aren't fatal but you'd wish they had been. Being paralyzed, for instance, trapped in your own body, unable to move on your own. That would be a fate far worse than death. Case notes in file 1245. My mom's psychic warning before a car accident. I think your mom received a kind of future knowledge that her subconscious couldn't properly convey to the conscious, no more than as an emotion, a strong gut urge without truly understanding what it meant. In this case, that there would be an accident and the injury would be focused on the chest area where the seatbelt is. Of course, she didn't see the accident, she didn't see the seatbelt, she just knew where the injury would be. The connection of love that was infused with pain. And I do understand her reluctance to talk about it. Who wants to think that a random strong emotion can be connected to the future, an event that's going to happen a few minutes later? It would make anyone anxious. In a certain sense, I wouldn't want that power. Case notes for the creepy file number 109. Codes and secrets at the Denver airport. So I don't think it is a joke. I do think it was likely a code of some sort, but for what I have no idea. Bunnies and Easter when it's not Easter? So yeah, I wouldn't even hope to guess at what it meant. The Denver airport location always creeped me out. There are so many conspiracies surrounding the airport, and while most aren't exactly accurate, it's still interesting to ponder. And yes, this wasn't the same location, but just speaking of the current airport as it is now. For instance, there's a conspiracy of the coordinates given to the humans by the aliens in Spielberg's Close Encounter of the Third Kind take you to the Denver International Airport. Now in reality, these coordinates land 51 miles northwest of the airport. Although, it's still pretty damn close. I wonder why those coordinates. Maybe they were just random and it's a coincidence, I don't know. Bit odd though. While tons of conspiracies don't pan out in regards to the Denver airport, that damned statue I can't shake. It's so creepy. Why would anyone design that for a prominent airport or any location? I don't get it. It's so bizarre. Case notes for the bonus file, the ghostly game of Dodgeball. I find myself thinking about my only church experience, well, 2, counting the one with my grandma 2 years ago. There is an impressive atmosphere in most churches. My guess is it relates to the intense focus of minds that congregate there on a specific topic. When pooled collectively, the mind affects the charge in the air, I guess you could say. Best way I can describe it. As for the ball, I guess a lonely ghost, probably a child. How could you not be lonely, tethered to one spot, reliving the same moments again and again? It would drive anyone mad, or at least lonely. And now time for the quote of the day. A door is what a dog is perpetually on the wrong side of. Ogden Nash. Very true. Very accurate for Mr. Ben. He wants to go outside, and then he wants to come back in. Then he wants to go back outside. Then he wants to come in my room, and then he wants to go outside of my room, but then I open the door and he doesn't want to leave, and then I close the door and he wants to leave, and it's madness. But that's the nature of chaos and dogs. I still love them. They're too good for us, even if they can't make up their minds. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.